Hello and welcome to the Lockdown Wolves postcast. We're live following the Timberwolves' exciting win over the Denver Nuggets. Jack Borman and I on the big win next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Lockdown Wolves postcast. This is the Lockdown Minnesota Podcast Network. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of the daily Lockdown Wolves podcast. I'm joined by Jack Borman tonight. We're going to talk all about a very exciting Timberwolves win over the Nuggets. This thing was an absolute roller coaster, and I think there's like 7 different places we could start. Each team had massive runs that led to a really exciting finish that ended up in the Wolves' favor. So we're going to dig into a lot of different elements of this game. First, though, a shout out to FanDuel, our title sponsors of today's show. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. All right. So, Jack, this was a game that the Wolves kind of dominated early. Things kind of zigged and they zagged, and it was a massive Nuggets run in the second half. We should mention Jamal Murray left in the third quarter, is in concussion protocol. There were a lot of weird things we can get into, but the Nuggets went on a 25-3 run in the fourth quarter, basically spanning like the whole middle portion of the fourth. And then the Wolves closed the game with, I think, a 15-2 run, and ultimately win on an Anthony Edwards go-ahead bucket, a couple of massive Rudy Gobert free throws, and then a great defensive play by Rudy Gobert. I guess we could start with the final, few possessions there where the Wolves went on this big 15-2 run. What were your biggest takeaways from that stretch late in the game?
Yeah, I think you unquestionably, the first thing you have to do is look at when Chris Finch decided to go to Nikola Alexander-Walker over Jaden McDaniels. The last time I checked, Jaden McDaniels was like a minus 31 in this game. He scored the first 8 points of this game for the Timberwolves, and then just kind of went completely silent from there, was in foul trouble, picked up his 5th foul with about 8 minutes to go in this one. And so Finchy turned to Nikola Alexander-Walker. I believe it was at the 5:14 mark of the fourth quarter. The Wolves were down 110-102. He scored the team's next 7 points, then stole a pass leading to that Ant bomb 3, which got within 1 and really got the crowd pumping with about 150 to go. And then, I think it was smart to go to him because I think Nikhil's fared better with some of those really, quick guards, and Russell Westbrook still at his old age is still certainly one of those lightning quick guards, and being able to keep him out of the paint, was really, really important. He just kind of forced Russell Westbrook into being an entry passer for Jokic, and then he was able to double off of Westbrook and was super active both on and off the ball defensively. And then if he's able to score points in the way that he is in the fourth quarter, that was just tremendous. I mean, it was a lot of Anthony Edwards passing the ball in the fourth quarter, and I was sitting there like, Anthony Edwards did not take a shot in the first 4 minutes that he played in the fourth quarter, and he didn't even enter until under the 7-minute mark. And normally he comes back around somewhere in between the 7:30 and 8-minute marks. And so he sat longer, and then it took him longer to get into the game. And so I think Timberwolves fans just have to be really grateful that Nikola Alexander-Walker was there and stepped up when I think a lot of Timberwolves fans were kind of ready to call this one. And then the other thing that I want to point out too, right? So Rudy Gobert gets absolutely obliterated by Christian Braun on that huge dunk. And then we get double text at the 5:14 mark. And from that point on, that was when Nikola Alexander-Walker came in the game and was kind of that steady force. And, things really could have gone off the rails from there. But what happens? Kind of poetic that Rudy Gobert walled up on Christian Braun on the final Denver possession, or the penultimate Denver possession, gets the rebound, goes and makes both free throws. I think, is pretty fitting that, that everybody bagged on Rudy after he had a really, and we'll get into a really tremendous first 3 quarters, had one bad moment, and then still was just right there to help put the game on ice for the Wolves.
Yeah, the Gobert, the double technical with 5 minutes to play. It was after that dunk, it was an 8-point game, and it really and then after that, it expanded to 10. think it was still at 10 with just over 3 minutes to play before Nickeil Alexander-Walker hit a big three and then scored the next 5 for Minnesota. Actually, no, scored the next 8 for Minnesota there. He went on an 8-0 run, Alexander Walker did. But that Gobert Brown double technicals really kind of, it felt like that's where it could go off the rails. Our first comment tonight was from Noah. Gobert is horrible, and then he came around a few comments later and hit us with the Gobert rocks. So appreciate Noah for coming around quickly on that one. He had some help with some others in the comment section, but yeah, I mean, it was, I think poetic's the best way to put it. Like, Gobert was fantastic for so much of this game and awesome down the stretch. It really was, obviously the Ant hits the big shot, but the two defensive possessions by Gobert that you mentioned, and then also the final, the free throws, I guess, sandwiched in between. So, yeah, I mean, crazy because like this thing started with the Wolves, going on, building a lead. The Nuggets go on a run. It's close at halftime. The Wolves build another lead in the third quarter. The Nuggets go on another run. And then in the fourth, we mentioned the 25-3 extended run for the Nuggets. I guess we may as well work our way backwards a little bit and talk about kind of what happened there that then led to, you mentioned the adjustment that Finch made with Nickeil Alexander-Walker playing in place of McDaniels down the stretch. But in terms of that Nuggets run in the fourth, besides Ant being on the bench for most of it, what else did you see that happened to Minnesota that allowed, 25-3 is an extremely extended run. What did you see that kind of led to that for Denver?
Yeah, I mean, the rebounding was at the heart of it for me. I mean, the Nuggets had 7 offensive rebounds for 8 second chance points in the fourth quarter alone. And then they made 3 of their 7 threes in the fourth quarter as well. So when you're able to do that and you're able to, to get out and run in transition, it's just a huge testament for Denver. I mean, in addition to the 7 offensive rebounds for 8 second chance points for Denver as well. You also have 6 turnovers for 9 points on the other end of the floor. So they really were able to just live on second chances and playing off of turnovers for the Wolves. And again, they waited a little bit too long to get Anthony Edwards back in the game. You would have asked Jaden McDaniels to be a little bit more of a scorer, once he came back into the game. And he just couldn't really do that outside of that one, dunk that he had from that corner cut. I just think that the ball movement was a little stagnant. Again, there just wasn't a super clear hierarchy after they scored those 8 really quick points from Naz Reid and Mike Conley. And I think that's just going to be something to monitor as we continue to plow ahead here, is that I think once Anthony Edwards is not in the game, it needs to be a little bit more regimented in terms of exactly who they're going to as a scorer. I think, we saw Dante DiVincenzo be that guy for stretches, really confident, shooting the ball from 3. And we've seen Naz have some good stretches, but I think we just have to find a way, if you're the Timberwolves, to be able to, look at each other and say, like, all right, we got to play through Naz here. We got to play through Dante here, or, Julius is out there. We got to play through Julius. And right now I think they're still just trying to figure that out. And that's really, I think, highlighting why the bench play is so choppy right now. And this is a really, really bad Nuggets bench. The Timberwolves, again, in the first half, you want to look at the non-Jokic minutes. They won the non-Jokic minutes 15-3 in the first half in almost 5 minutes of play. And then in the second half, they lost them 13-9 in 5 minutes of play. So I think that was big too. And I think that just kind of speaks to, the Timberwolves just couldn't really get into much of an offensive flow when they should be playing off of stops against a Nuggets team without Jokic on the floor that more often than not is going to have either 3 or 4 non-shooters on the floor.
Yeah, and it's funny, you talk about the lack of offensive flow, and I 100% agree with you, and you're mostly talking about the bench unit, but like this is yet another game, and we can look at the loss to the Mavericks on Tuesday, where the Wolves outshot Dallas, they out-assisted Dallas, they outshot them from the three-point line, from the free throw line in terms of attempts, and this happened, again in this game, they didn't attempt as many free throws as Denver, but they were 52% from the field. Denver's under 45%. The Wolves make 18 threes, Denver only makes 11 threes. They have 4 more assists than Denver. But you mentioned the defensive rebounding, the lack of defensive rebounding for the Wolves. And then, turnovers, again, a little bit of an issue as well, although not as stark an issue as it was against Dallas. But the offensive flow, it's almost like the offense overall has been so much better through 5 games than it was over the course of last season. but it's still inconsistent. And it's these kind of fits and starts of like, what is the rotation? What should it look like? Who should be, how should Finch be staggering these rotations? And what's the identity, as you said, when Ant's off the floor? Because the sum of the parts is still a good offense. It's just, they have these lapses, and the fourth quarter is a great example where they just go completely dark for a period of time, and they're giving up long rebounds and not getting back, kind of exacerbating the problem by not getting back defensively after having bad offensive possessions. And then that's what's leading to these big opponent runs, because again, you glance at the box score, it's like, all right, they've got it offensively. And I think coming into this game, they were like 13th in the league or something in offensive rating. And it's probably going to go up after this game. So it is just kind of a weird, a weird combination of factors right now that's leading to these issues that they're having offensively.
Yeah, and one more thing too, like you look at the lineups that we've been seeing a lot at the start of the second and the fourth quarters, which is Mike Conley, Nikola Alexander-Walker, Dante DiVincenzo, Naz Reid, and Rudy Gobert. I mean, outside of Naz Reid, there's not really a go-to scorer in that. Those are mostly complementary players that are used to playing off a guy. And I think you either need to ask Dante DiVincenzo to be more of a scorer, like he was. He absolutely lit it up in the second half of last season for the Knicks and into the playoffs. I think you need to ask Dante DiVincenzo to take a few more shots. Or again, if you want to get more out of Jaden McDaniels, I'm going to be a broken record on this show all year long saying I think you got to find a way to play Jaden McDaniels more at the start of the second quarter and the start of the fourth quarter if you really want to empower him and try to upskill some of what he's able to do offensively and what he's able to give this team. And I just think they need another scorer, and whether that's asking DiVincenzo to do more or putting Jaden McDaniels in the game and say, hey man, we just need you to try to create more with the ball in your hands. I just think this is going to be a little bit of a cat and mouse game with the bench that we're going to see here for a little bit, at least until DiVincenzo can feel a little bit more comfortable. But maybe it's a game where you go to Rob Dillingham and you say, hey man, like, let's see what you can do. But we may not see that until, Mike Conley misses the inevitable game coming up here with old age. And maybe he doesn't play tomorrow night on the second night of a back-to-back. We'll see. So, yeah,
I'm curious to see if we, still to this point, we've only seen, 9 guys play. Joe Ingles didn't play in the first half, which has been the regular rhythm for him, is playing in the first half. And he only, I think his 5 minutes were all in the third quarter of this game. And so it's really just an 8-man rotation plus 5 minutes for Ingles. I'd be willing to bet, we talked about this on Wednesday on the basketball party, that changes on Saturday, but we'll see exactly how. All right, I want to get into how the Wolves defended Jokic with no Karl-Anthony Towns. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of the Locked On Wolves postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And of course, lots of NBA action on Saturday night. You've got NFL on Sunday, college football day Saturday. There's tons of stuff to get into this weekend on FanDuel. There's also adjusted win total lines for the NBA, which is a ton of fun. Go check out where the Wolves win total line has been adjusted now through 5 games. Again, $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk a little bit about how the Timberwolves started the game and really, I guess, how they handled throughout the game guarding Nikola Jokic. This was kind of one of the big questions headed into this thing. We know Karl-Anthony Towns has been one of the very best individual defenders against Jokic over the past 5 years plus, going back to when there was some question over who was the better player, 5-6 years ago. There was this almost kind of semi-rivalry between the two. And then obviously continuing into the playoffs last year, Cat did an outstanding job guarding Jokic, one round after he guarded Kevin Durant for the majority of the sweep over the Suns. But the question was, how are the Wolves going to guard Jokic? I mean, Gobert was not great against him one-on-one when he was matched up against him, when Cat was on the bench, foul trouble, et cetera, in the playoff series last year. So coming into the game, the question was, would it be Gobert? And they started that way, but we saw very quickly Randall did a bit of a better job. We even saw Naz guard Jokic for a stretch there in the first half, and the Wolves were willing to pass that off and to switch it. But what did you see in how the Wolves initially approached it, and then how that played out over the course of the game in terms of guarding Jokic?
Yeah, last season in the playoffs, and it felt like every single time Jokic had Gobert on him, he just walked him down to the front of the rim to the restricted arc and just threw it over the top of the rim. And there was, nothing the Wolves could do about that, just because Jokic is so much bigger than Gobert. And you thought that you might see that tonight, but the Nuggets approached it a little bit differently. I think you saw more of Jokic playing in the mid post, where there was still enough space for guys to cut around him, cut behind him. And they even screened Gobert a little bit with some smalls to get Jokic a little bit of a runway into that little floater area. So we saw that. We saw 4 of the easiest makes that you'll see for Denver to start the game. They started 4 of 4, and all of them were right at the rim because Jokic was playing through the mid post, taking Gobert a little bit away from the rim, and then allowing getting other guys into the game with them cutting off of him and getting into the teeth of the defense. And then the second thing that I saw that we didn't see quite as much of last season was Mike Conley was making a very clear point to try and tip entry passes into Jokic in the post from Christian Brown specifically. Obviously, Christian Brown came off the bench. They had KCP. And KCP, I think, is a little bit taller than Brown. So that's probably why you're seeing Mike Conley be able to try to jump up and make more of an impact there in the passing lane. And then once Jokic caught the ball, we saw Julius Randle, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Jaden McDaniels really want to help off of the guys that they were guarding and double Jokic in the paint or double Jokic in the post and try to force the ball out of his hands. And that's why we saw both Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. get going. We saw Aaron Gordon just was absolutely lighting it up, made seemingly every single shot that he looked at. I think tonight was the first time he made 5 threes in the game in over 3 years. So it was, it was kind of like one of the, what was it, game 3 or game 4 last year in the Western Conference semifinals, where Gordon just went absolutely bananas and made seemingly every 3 that he took. But yeah, I mean, between the 2 of those guys, Gordon and Michael Porter Jr., if you're going to ask those 2 guys to light up, and they're going to score 56 or 57 points on, 22 of 36 shooting, and you're still going to be able to come out with a win, I think you're doing something right. And I think you got to give Rudy Gobert a lot of credit for the way that, he was able to defend Nikola Jokic on whether it was the little Sombor shuffle, fadeaway jump shots, whether it was the, kind of the running hooks that we've seen Jokic make. He made everything really tough for Jokic, and certainly he fouled him quite a few times, and Jokic shot 10 free throws, and that was, he had as many free throw makes, 8, as he did field goal makes, so that was certainly part of it. But overall, I think Rudy Gobert did a really good job on Nikola Jokic, and it's hilarious that he had 26, 13, and 9, and we're saying that Rudy Gobert did a great job on him, but it certainly felt that way. And I just felt like Chris Finch probably thought that Julius Randle was just a little bit too small, a little too short to play Jokic. Carl is 6'11" and 250, but Julius Randle is 250 as well. It's just that he's 6'9". You're just worried that Jokic is just going to finish right over the top of him, and we certainly saw that a few times.
Yeah, I mean, Cat was just like the perfect build to try and guard Jokic, the right combination of size and, still laterally quick enough and still big enough and athletic enough, and played tough enough, somewhat ironically with some of the other, occasional shortcomings in Cat's game. This was one of the things he was great at, was guarding Jokic. And I agree with everything you said about choosing Gobert over Randle in this scenario. And but at the same time, I said on the Lockdown Wolves show, I think I would have been on Friday, that, there's like this whole, got to make Jokic a scorer. And obviously that's it's fool's gold, because no matter what you do, it's truly a pick your poison situation more than any other player in the league. But he did both in this game, but he didn't do, he didn't have 18 assists, and he didn't have 40 points like he's done a couple times already this year. He didn't quite have a triple double, so they did enough to limit the different facets of his game. And Gobert did a much better job one-on-one against him than he did last year in his limited time matched up against him in the playoffs. Let's talk about the other end of the floor for Gobert, and we could talk about some of the ancillary players, the I don't want to say non-stars, because Gobert is a star, but he's not going to average 17 points a game, and he dropped 17 in this game on 7 of 10 shooting. And I believe maybe 5 of his 7 buckets were lobs. and like, it was clearly something the Wolves had identified, like, hey, I mean, first of all, it's something that Conley and Gobert had going back to Utah. They never quite replicated it last year in Minnesota, in the last year and a half, at least not to the frequency that they executed the lob with the Jazz. But in this game, we saw a lot of Dante DiVincenzo, a little bit of Conley. I think it was against the Mavs. We saw Ant throw a lob to Rudy. So it's unclear if this is like a longer, hey, we're finally figuring this out as a team, like longer term thing, or if this was just, hey, we can exploit this against Denver. We saw early in the game, Dario Saric played briefly, and they executed like 2 to 3 lobs on him very quickly. It's like these smaller lineups. If Rudy's in the game, it should be relatively simple, and he ended up scoring 17 in this game for the Wolves.
Yeah, it's why the Jazz felt so unbeatable, back when Karl was playing the 5 for the Wolves, in the stretch of the prime Jazz years, was because they just had that spread pick and roll set up super well. And it just felt like any single time you committed to Conley, it was just, whoop, there goes the lob. And it was the easiest, 18 points and 14 rebounds for Rudy Gobert that you could have. And I thought it was important too that Dante DiVincenzo, was really starting to find a connection with Gobert as well. I think in the first few games and even in the preseason, you saw Dante really make an effort to try to throw up some of those lobs. And I think sometimes Rudy just wasn't necessarily expecting it, just because obviously how could you, in that Dante's a new player, don't exactly know whether those are floaters or whether those are lobs and how exactly he likes to play. But now I think that you're starting to see some of that chemistry grow, considering that these are two guys that are for sure going to be on the team, not only this year, but in the, next 2-3 years. I think that's really important, especially just because when Mike Conley's been off the floor, they've had to rely a lot on Nickeil Alexander-Walker to be that guy to find Gobert. And now that you add, a third guy that's able to do that, I think that that's going to be really important, especially when you consider that DiVincenzo likes to play out of the corner quite a bit. And you see Gobert set those wide pin downs for those curl actions that DiVincenzo can get and just attack the rim. And if they commit too hard to DiVincenzo, it's a lob for Rudy. And if they don't, then, you feel pretty good about DiVincenzo either getting all the way to the rim for a layup or being able to kick it to the opposite side and then get the defense in transition or in rotation. So, and I was just really pleased with Gobert's effort on the offensive glass too. How many offensive rebounds did Gobert get credited for here over the course of the entire game? He only got credited for 4 offensive rebounds, but it felt like his activity really led to, whether it was Randall or Ant or McDaniels, being able to get more tap outs that, either that Denver collected or the Wolves ended up collecting. It just felt like he made a lot of defensive rebounds really difficult for Denver. And that was important too. But I think the other part of this too is with Gobert specifically, he set so many just great screens that allowed the Timberwolves to get downhill into the paint and be able to kick out to find wide open corner shooters. Cause there were guys that had to sink from the corner to be able to, help the helper in those situations. And there were just a lot of wide open threes for the Timberwolves. And that's certainly what, we used to see in those prime Jazz days when they would get up, half as many threes as they took overall shots. And that's what we saw tonight. The Wolves take 83 shots, 42 of them are threes, and they made 18 of them for 43%. That's a pretty good mark. And I think a lot of that can be credited to Rudy Gobert's gravity as a roller inside.
Yeah. In 3-point, last year, 3-point percentage wise, they finished, top 3 in the league in 3-point percentage, and yet the 3-point rate wasn't quite there. Now this year they're taking threes. They're taking a ton of threes early in the season, and that's something we'll unpack, I'm sure, after future games. I want to get into, let's hit a couple of actually we can do this now. Hit a couple of role players quick. You mentioned DiVincenzo just a moment ago. We started by talking a little bit about Alexander Walker played over McDaniels, but before we turn our attention to the Spurs game on Saturday, I just want to hit like a couple of these guys and get some quick thoughts on like we haven't really talked about Nas a whole lot, and he had a really nice stretch in this game as the Wolves were kind of building. I can't remember who was their first or second double-digit lead of the second half in this game, but he was great. He had 16 points. He was a plus 13. And this is, I always, on Lockdown Wolves, I talk all the time about how single game individual player plus minus is so noisy. It doesn't, sometimes it tells you nothing. And this is one of those games where it actually tells you a lot, because this was a game of runs and the Wolves ultimately made an adjustment to their rotation because of of the Alexander Walker versus McDaniels thing. I think you mentioned this off the top, Jack, but McDaniels is a minus 31 in 26 minutes. Alexander Walker was a plus 25 in 23 minutes. It doesn't get any more stark than that. Nas and Mike Conley were the only other two Timberwolves players that were double-digit positives in this game. And it's a game they only won by 3. So clearly those guys made a big difference. I thought Nas was great. DiVincenzo was, and this is another one, like this is the flip side of that. DiVincenzo was a minus 4, but he played really well in this game. And there's obviously a lot of noise when it comes to individual player plus minus, but for the most part, I thought all the role players except McDaniels, for the most part, did their job in this game and played pretty well.
Yeah, no question. I think for Nas specifically, I was most impressed with his rim protection in that first half. I think he had 2 of his 3 blocks in the first half. But again, 3 blocks for Nas in 23 minutes is extremely productive, considering when a decent chunk of those minutes came alongside Rudy Gobert. The way that he was able to protect the rim behind Gobert guarding Jokic was really, really important. And then, it was a really quiet 16 points for Nas. It kind of felt like, he had points in the first 3 quarters that were really just kind of sprinkled in these runs where they weren't super explosive points, but they were just, him just kind of scoring in the flow of the offense and really helping to grow and extend leads. And then, he had those 5 pretty loud points at the start of the fourth quarter that were really helpful for the Wolves. I think with how Nas's role has had to change once again this year, where, a month ago, 6 weeks ago, we were thinking, oh, is Nas going to play the 3? And now we're looking at Nas as the full-time backup 5 for this team. I think his versatility, especially defensively, the way that he's able to slide his feet and defend on the perimeter, but also be able to protect the rim has been huge. I'd love to see Nas get more than 3 rebounds, though I think that's something that he's going to continue to need to improve on. I think the Wolves need to they're still trying to figure out what the right balance is of try to have Nas be a guy that can leak out and finish possessions and transition versus being a guy that you need to have rebounding the ball. I think when he's playing alongside Randall, it's probably a good thing that Randall's the one that's there because he's a good outlet passer to try to rebound. But, they are going to get beat up on the glass a little bit when he's in there at the 5. And then, speaking of rebounding, Donte DiVincenzo grabbed 8 rebounds. I thought that he was really, really productive, especially in that, that third quarter when they started to blow it open. It just felt like everything that he was doing was really nice. I think, again, like he's just very much a Chris Finch-like player. I think Chris Finch wants to get guys coming out of the corner, wants to get guys that are willing to take threes in transition, want to get guys that can, dribble, shoot, and pass and make quick decisions and defend multiple positions. And he can certainly do that. But I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been the guy that's been most impressive to me. And I think it's a tough spot for Nickeil, considering that this is probably going to be his last year with the Timberwolves, and it's a contract year for him. And you wouldn't know it because he's just played so within himself. I think this would be a certainly understandable situation if a guy's trying to do too much or show more than what he can do as a means of trying to get more money in free agency at the end of the season. But the way that he's just completely committed and grown comfortable in this role now in his 3rd season with the Timberwolves has been a joy to watch. I think, very clearly having him play the backup point guard spot when he's been out there with DiVincenzo, but not necessarily having the same level of pressure on him maybe that we had last season, I think has certainly taken some weight off of his shoulders and has allowed him to play a much more free-flowing and confident game. And it's just been really fun to watch because he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And he's a really, really easy dude to root for, especially when you also add in that he hustles and he plays as hard as just about anybody does on a night-to-night basis, and playing hard and doing all the little things on a night-to-night basis is a skill in the NBA. And it's really fun that the Timberwolves have 2 of those guys unquestionably, and Nickeil and Rudy. And when those 2 guys are clicking, doing all those things on the same night like they were tonight, it produces a really, really, fun basketball game that I think speaks really clearly and directly to a fan base like the Timberwolves fan base that really appreciates that type of stuff from their players.
Yeah, Nickeil, after really a roller coaster last year in the playoffs, it's great to see him get off to this year, this season playing so well. He was great against Phoenix and had some struggles later in the playoffs, but he's been so good through the first 5 games this season. All right, next I want to look ahead to the Spurs game. We'll talk briefly about the overall kind of outlook of the West, but really kind of focus on Wolves Spurs on Saturday night. We'll do that next to close the show. Today's episode of the Locked On Wolves postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota is brought to us by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. No matter what you like to see live, you can find it on Game Time. Their curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Really, any of those things you can find on Game Time. You can toggle on their all-in pricing feature to make sure that you can see the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can also get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy over at Game Time. The lowest price guarantee means that you're going to find the lowest price at Game Time. Otherwise, they'll credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKDOWNNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKDOWNNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, so next up for the Wolves, they take on the San Antonio Spurs on Saturday. It's the first back-to-back set of the season for the Wolves, and we mentioned the rotation stuff earlier. Is there a chance some different guys play? Overall, the Western Conference is, we're only 5 games in, so of course it's very jumbled. There's teams that look like they're maybe worse than we expected / have injury problems, whether it's Memphis or Denver or whoever. The Spurs are 2-3. And the only games that they've lost, like they're all pretty excusable losses, right? Like they lost to Dallas on opening night at Dallas. They lost at OKC, which was a fun Chet Wemby game. That was a 12-point loss. They lost by 5 to Houston. They also beat Houston and they won easily at Utah on the second night of a back-to-back on Thursday. So obviously the headliner here is Wemby, and it should be a really fun game on Saturday night. But what are you looking for, I guess, off the top with that Spurs matchup?
Yeah, obviously, you look at how the Timberwolves are going to defend Victor Wembanyama if you're going to continue to have Rudy Gobert on him, and if Wembanyama is going to continue to play farther away from the rim. I think we've seen some teams, so far this season get away with guarding Wembanyama with bigger wings and being able to keep their centers in the paint. And it's been problematic for San Antonio thus far. They've really struggled shooting the three, just 32%. That's 6th worst in the NBA this year. And then they've also really struggled with turnovers. They're averaging 17.2 turnovers a game, which is also 6th worst in the league. And because of that, their spacing hasn't been great. They haven't been getting to the free throw line. They are also 6th worst in free throw attempts. So I think if the Wolves are able to pack the paint and just kind of crater the spacing and force Wembanyama to be more of a jump shooter, and I think they'll be okay. I also think they're really missing Trey Jones. And again, it's a lot of what we saw last season in that, the Sohan Wemby minutes just haven't been it. And I'm excited to see what Chris Paul is going to continue to do to help, make things easier for Victor Wembanyama. But I think, again, when you're not able to surround Wemby with the requisite spacing, it just becomes tougher for them to operate offensively. So I think it should be a really good matchup for the Timberwolves defense. I think if the Timberwolves defense struggles in this game, I think it'll be kind of fair for us to question, like, hey, do we need to have a more serious conversation about, where this defense is at 6 games into the season? But I think it should be a really good opportunity for the Timberwolves to get back on track defensively. But again, if they don't, I think one area that you're gonna see them struggle is on the offensive glass, or for San Antonio on the offensive glass, I should say, just with how big Wemby is. So that'll be a good test for them.
Yeah, this feels like the sort of game we mentioned a couple times now, the rotation, and is this where a 10th player actually gets to play? We haven't seen the rookies. We haven't seen Josh Minott, who of course was fantastic in the preseason. This feels like it could be a Josh Minott game, just from an activity level standpoint, young, athletic, active, all those things, which, a lot of the Spurs roster is. It feels like it could be a good kind of match to put Minott on the floor and kind of see what happens. Second night of a back-to-back, who knows who plays and who doesn't, or how much guys play. But that is certainly something we can look out for on Saturday. All right, that's all we got for you today here on the Postcast. Of course, we go live after every Wolves game. Typically, it's Luke Inman hosting the show along with Jack Borman. So make sure to tune in after the Spurs game Saturday night and after every Wolves game on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. The audio of this show will be on the Locked On Wolves audio feed, so go check it out if you miss it live, or if you ever can't watch it live, you can check it out there. I host that show daily Monday through Friday, so I'll be back on Monday. We'll talk about Wolves Spurs from Saturday on Monday's Locked On Wolves show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day, for checking out the Locked On Wolves postcast here at Locked On Sports Minnesota. For myself and for Jack Borman, thank you. Have a great night.